Dünya Gıda Güvenliği Günü nedeniyle 7 Haziran tarihinde başladığımız 5 günlük Gıda Güvenliği Sohbetleri toplantısının 4. oturumundayız bugün. Bugün birbirinden değerli 3 konuşmacımız çok ilginç ve çok da önemli bir konu hakkında görüşlerini bizlerle paylaşacak. İklim değişikliğinin gıda güvenliği üzerine olası etkileri, mevcut etkileri, olası etkileri neler? Bunlar hakkında görüş alışverişinde bulunacaklar. Bilgilerini bizlerle paylaşacaklar. Ben sözü kendilerine bırakmadan önce birkaç ufak hatırlatma yapmak istiyorum. Bütün programımız kayıt altına alınıyor ve bu hafta sonu erdikten sonra YouTube üzerinden yayına verilecek ve isteyen dilediği yerde, dilediği şekilde dinleyebilecek. Soru cevaplarımızı sizler için ayrılan Q&A bölümünde yazılı olarak iletmenizi rica edeceğiz. Ardından bütün konuşmalar tamamlandıktan sonra ilgili konuşmacıya sorular benim tarafından yönlendirilecek. Konuşma süresi her bir konuşmacımız için 15 dakika. Kendilerinden bu süreye sadık kalmalarını rica ediyoruz ki programı fazla aksatmadan, uzatmadan tamamlayabilelim. Son 15 dakikamızda da sizlerden gelecek soru yanıtlarla tamamlayacağız konuşmalarımızı. Ben şimdi ilk konuşmasını yapmak üzere Sayın Doktor Vittorio Fattori'yi sözü bırakmak istiyorum. Kendisi Birleşmiş Milletler FAO'da görevli ve Unpacking the Burden of Food Safety başlıklı konuşmasını bizlerle paylaşacaklar. Sayın Fattori, buyurunuz.
Hocam isterseniz bir de çeviriyle...
Thank you very much.
Çeviri yapılacak konuşma süresi boyunca. Ekranın sağ alt köşesinde interpretation kısmını görüyorsunuz. Türkçe ya da İngilizce tercih etmek isteyenler buradan diledikleri seçeneği işaretleyerek konuşmanın dilediği dilde Türkçe ya da İngilizce çevirisini takip edebilecekler. Buyurunuz Sayın Fattori.
Thank you. Thank you. A good day to everyone. Thanks very much also to the Turkish Food Safety Association for this kind invitation to be with you today and present some of the work that we have done at FAO on this very important topic of climate change and food safety. I'm sharing my screen. Hopefully everyone can see it. My name is Vittorio Fattori, and I do work in the Food System and Food Safety Division at FAO. I work mainly in the area of scientific advice, but also looking at emerging issues and emerging drivers that may impact on food safety. And obviously, climate change is one of the major ones that we are observing from a food safety point of view. I'd like to start by framing the discussion on exactly this very topical issue of how the changing system in the agri-food chains is bringing more complexity to food safety, right? If we look at the various stages of for example, production and up to processing, the way food is now distributed, and or the attitude of consumers towards food, and also the management of food waste and loss. All of this is changing, and all of this has a potential impact to food safety. Some impacts could also be beneficial. For example, there are new technology that in the area of processing may be providing some benefits to food safety, but other impacts may be providing some challenges, or at least posing some questions to which we need to be prepared and to which we need to be able to have some responses. Obviously, climate change, it's one of those mega trends that is impacting on different sectors and is impacting also on food and agriculture. Climate change, it's indeed one of the defining challenges of our times. It's very high on the agenda of the UN, and this is just one of the definition that is actually being agreed upon by the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. Just to say, the recognition that within the UN at the international level, it is being given to the very important topic of climate change. But then, as we said, climate change can impact very many different sectors. And from where we sit, from the Food and Agriculture Organization, we are, of course, interested on looking at the impact that it has on food and agriculture. And these are just some quick facts that I'd like to share with you. One, just to say that according to some very recent report from the IPCC, the impact that the rising temperatures may have in terms of increase of temperature on Earth may be having some very much impact on the food prices and also on public health. In the decades between 2006 and 2016, more than a quarter of the damage and loss that were caused by disasters related to climate change were being experienced in developing countries in the agriculture sector. Indeed, as you can see here, the vast majority of damages and loss that were caused, for example, by drought, which it's going to be exacerbated by climate change, were absorbed by the agriculture sector. This, of course, comes with some very important impact on public health, but also some very remarkable impacts in terms of the economies. And here again, just some to quantification of the economic cost that these have in terms of environmental cost, in terms of social cost. And last but not least, these also impacting, of course, the additional burden on water systems, because there is an increasing competition for what is already a limited resource in terms of water, for energy, for water, for food production, for fishery, and of course, ultimately also for food security. So all of these needs to be considered in this complex scenario. One thing, though, that we from the FAO, we are always trying to be a little bit proactive. There was, of course, during the last several years, lots of discussion about the impact of climate change on food and agriculture in various sectors. Of course, the food security and food production were some of the focus area. But we also have tried to draw global attention of the impacts that climate change may have on food safety. Back in 2008, we published one of the earlier reports that was trying to shed some light of the implication that climate change may have to food safety. And after more than 10 years, we thought it was a good time to sort of take stock of the knowledge and the evidence that has emerged since then, and update and try to crystallize that into a new publication, which is the one that you can see on the right, which is the title of my talk, the Unpacking the Burden on Food Safety. So this is a distillation of the recent research on the topic, and as I'm going to quickly present to you today, and the diversity of impacts that climate change have on food safety and food safety hazards in particular. I'll start with one of the main areas, because the impact on the marine environment, it's one of the key impact that climate change has. And so in terms of food safety, the impact that it has on algal blooms, it's definitely one to be considered. In particular, the frequency and the duration of some of these HABs, the hazardous algal blooms, have increased at the global level, also in regions that were not used or prepared to have these kind of issues. And this it's due to very different factors. There may be also something that has to do with the overabundance of use and application of fertilizer, for example. Of course, the acidification and the toxicity may also be linked to CO2, and of course the warming temperature and seasonal windows of certain hubs have been expanded and persistent for longer periods. Heavy metals, it's also another big group of hazards that is being impacted by climate change. Again, multiple different reasons for that. Some, just picking on some, for example, one that probably was not so much investigated in the past, it's how the acceleration of the permafrost thawing may release some metals that were traditionally, historically trapped there, for example, and then being released into the environment, into the marine environment in this case. Of course, these have a particular relevance when it comes to some of the elements, like, for example, arsenic, which can be accumulated by some staple crops like rice. And it goes without saying, rice is one of the food that is widely and most consumed around the world. And so an impact that this has on rice, it can cause some very important impact in terms of food safety. Methyl mercury, it's another big discussion. Methyl mercury, it's mainly an issue in terms of seafood. As we know, the methylation, so the conversion from the mercury to the organic form into methyl form, methyl mercury, it is temperature dependent, and there are very other factors that may be influenced by climate change. So there is an increase that is being observed. And so this is also something that needs to be monitored with attention. Mycotoxin, I'm gonna almost skip it because we have a key expert talking to us today, Professor Battilani. But this obviously it's another key area for us in FAO that we are looking at, because again, mycotoxin and some mycotoxin in particular, like aflatoxin and fumonisin, they are affecting some staple food crops like maize, for example. And so for us, also looking at the developing countries' perspective, this is a key issue, and climatoxin and mycotoxin are being influenced by climate change in many different ways. These are just some examples, not just by temperature, but also drought, the stress that induced by pest damage and others. So this is obviously another important hazard that needs to be looked at and monitored. This is a short infographic that we wanted we have created with our communication colleagues, just to say that all of these impacts that I've very quickly illustrated are not happening in isolation, right? So these are happening simultaneously not in silo, they are happening together in the environment. So, and you can see that one single factor that being associated with climate change, like for example, the raising of the temperatures, can impact on different levels in terms of food safety. From the waterborne and food pathogens, for example, increasing, for example, the incidence on Salmonella and Campylobacter, that some of the infections incidence is being raised. The fact that they are driving new plant pests into new territories and maybe leading also to an overuse, sometimes misuse of pesticides, this could also be an issue. The issue of heavy metals we have discussed, particularly this is important when we speak of some key staple food like rice. Mycotoxin, these fungal infections are spreading and are spreading also into outside of their geographical niche areas. So traditionally, some of these were in the tropical areas, but we are seeing these now shifting into other areas, like, for example, we are observing them in Europe. And then, of course, the algal blooms, as I said, these are also Ciguatera. Maybe it's one of those that you are familiar with, which again was traditionally an issue in the Pacific or in the Caribbean. And again, this is now expanding to other parts of the world. So these are all issues that are happening, and we need to be prepared, and we need to be ready to confront to these challenges. So, but how to do that? So the how, it's not easy, but there are ways. So one lessons, of course, from all of this, and by working in food safety, it's very familiar to all of us that are working on food safety, that these are not a single institution or single sector problem. These are cross-cutting issues that deserve a cross-cutting approach. What we call really a One Health. This is impacting the health of human, of course, it is impacting the health of the animals, it is impacting the health of the environment. So it doesn't really make sense to tackle these issues like climate change in isolation. We need to have a greater collaboration among different stakeholders, bringing together vets with physicians, with food safety authorities, with extension service, with people in research and academia, of course, working together, sharing information, sharing data, ultimately underpinning also some new ways for early warning and surveillance. The traditional way of doing surveillance, it is effective, but needs to be complemented by other ways. And in that optic, it is important to have this forward-looking approach. We call it foresight, looking into the horizon, looking into the future. So not wait for the things to happen, but actually trying to be proactive as much as possible to try and be ready and prepare for the decision. This, of course, requires trust across the board in terms of collaboration among countries, collaboration among stakeholders, which are not always very easy, but it's something that needs to be done. And just as I'm looking at my time, these are some of the issues that we are observing in terms of emerging topics, the microplastic endocrine disruptors, the marine toxins, it's obviously one, the impact of circular economy and how, from a food safety point of view, this needs to be looked with care. New production systems, the urban farming, vertical farming, of course, all the so-called cellular agriculture we are seeing now in the media, the lab-grown burger, right? So, okay, very good from a sustainability point of view, but what are the food safety implications? So all of this needs to be considered. One recent topic, well, not recent because we have looked at it into the past, but recent publication that we have, again, in the optic of sustainability, but also looking from a food safety point of view, is the issue of edible insects. This is the graph, the diagram on the left is just to show how competitive they are, the insects, compared to other conventional sources of protein in terms of feed conversion, in terms of water footprint, global warming, and also land use. You can see the insects are less impacting on the environment. But there are some food safety question marks that needs to be addressed. And in the report, we have tried to outline them. Just coming to the conclusions of my talk, some sort of take-home message that I would suggest. One is that I'd like to repeat, because sometimes in the big discussion around big topics like climate change, we need to remember the importance that food safety has for the overall food security. So that if the food is not safe, as we say, it's not food. So food safety it's key and needs to be key. But for food safety to be key, we need to stay vigilant, and we need to be showing continuous commitment. In that sense, we will need to push for a forward-looking approach rather than relying on reactive measures. And it makes complete sense to use that sort of One Health approach by looking at different sectors and cross-collaboration. And just concluding with some of our motto, and this is very timely because it's the week of the World Food Safety Day, we all need to care, because food safety is indeed everyone's business. And if we want to have some healthy life tomorrow, we need food safety now. We need food safety today. So I'm concluding with just some links, and these will hopefully be also shared with the participants. These are some of the recent publications that I mentioned. That we also have done a video that we don't have the time to project now, but it's on YouTube, about how climate change is threatening the safety of our food. With that, I'll conclude, and I wanted to thank you, of course, for your attention, and I'll stop sharing. Thank you.
Çok teşekkürler. Sayın Fattori, gerçekten çok çarpıcı ve çok da bilgilendirici bir sunumdu. Özellikle geçmiş 10 yıl içerisinde tarım sektörünün, gıda sektörünün beraberinde iklim değişikliğinin getirmiş olduğu felaketlerden nasıl etkilendiğini, %26'lık bir olumsuz etkilenme, ve önümüzdeki 10 yıl içerisinde de aşağı yukarı 122 milyon insanın beslenme zorluğu yaşayacağı, hem gıda güvenliğiyle hem de gıda güvencesiyle ilişkili olarak beslenme zorluğu yaşayacağını öngörmek hakikaten ürkütücü. Zaman çok daralıyor hepimiz için. Umarım çok kısa süre içerisinde etkin eylemler alınır ve iklim değişikliğinin gıda güvenliği ve güvencesi üzerine olumsuz etkilerini olabildiğince hafifletiriz. Çok teşekkürler konuşmanız için. Şimdi ben izninizle ikinci konuşmacımızı davet etmek istiyorum. Avrupa Gıda Güvenliği Otoritesi EFSA'dan Doktor Angelo Maggiore bize hem gıda ve yem güvenliği, hem bitki hayvan sağlığı, hem de beslenme kalitesi arasındaki ilişkileri, gıda güvenliği ile ilişkisini ve iklim değişikliği ilişkisi hakkında bilgiler paylaşacak bizlerle. Ben sözü Doktor Angelo Maggiore'ye bırakıyorum. Buyurunuz lütfen.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you very much to the Turkish colleagues for this kind invitation. I'm very pleased to be here with you today. First of all, I want to introduce myself. I'm Angelo Maggiore, working at the European Food Safety Authority in the Scientific Committee and Emerging Risks Unit. Vittorio has already introduced some of the aspects I would like to talk to you today. Today, I think it's important that I'm complementary to what Vittorio said, and therefore I will focus more on methodological aspects, but also on the overall effects of climate change without focusing on specific issues. Okay, I think I can go quite quickly here because Vittorio has already introduced the framework. Here, when I say the tuna word, I'm not talking about blue economy, I'm not talking about fish, I'm talking about this word, which is quite turbulent, quite unstable, novel, and ambiguous. So a lot of changes, and these changes are quite quickly accelerating, starting from the 50s, so much that some people, some scientists are thinking of introducing a new geological era called Anthropocene within the Holocene. And the idea is that how can we guarantee that in such a context, in such a global context characterized by interconnected changes, how can we be prepared and guarantee food safety also in the future? That's the challenge. And what we are trying to do at the European Food Safety Authority is to tackle this complexity and complex issue with a process, which is the process of the identification of emerging risks. When I talk about emerging risks, what I mean is new hazards or known hazards to which the exposure is increasing, or also the susceptibility. Another possibility is a change in composition of an environmental matrix or food item, determining a change in intake. So that's what we mean by emerging risks at EFSA. But emerging risks are not only specific risks or specific issues. If we want to put the food safety into a system approach, as Vittorio rightly said, we need to consider also drivers of change. So the factors of socioeconomic, environmental, or technological nature that can determine a change in the food system. And when we talk about emerging risks, the problem we have is...
Excuse me, Dr. Maggiore, are you sharing your presentation?
Yes.
We cannot see it.
Ah, sorry. Oh my God. Sorry for that. I try again. Can you see it?
Not now.
Not. No. You can't see it?
I cannot see.
Ah, that's strange. I see a frame around my presentation, so it seems that you are...
Right, it's coming now.
Now it's moving, yes.
Oh
Yes.
my, so you haven't, okay. Okay, but so you haven't seen the previous slides, correct?
Okay. That's right.
So you haven't seen anything so far.
We haven't seen so far. This is the first slide we see.
Oh my God. Okay, sorry. Okay, but we can start from here. We don't have time. Okay, so I was
If you wish,
saying
I can give you an extra 2-3 minutes if you want to start from the beginning.
Okay, thank you.
Just to make a quick summary.
Yeah. Okay. So I was about, actually, I think we can go directly here. So I was saying that a possible process we can elaborate, we can put in place for preparedness to future challenges is the process of identification of emerging risks. And I was defining what we mean by emerging risks. It's either a new hazard or it's a known hazard to which we observe an increase in exposure or in susceptibility, or also a change in composition of an environmental matrix or food item. That's what we define as emerging risks. And these emerging risks are usually inserted in a cloud of interacting drivers like socioeconomic drivers or environmental drivers or technological drivers. The problem we have with emerging risks is that usually we don't have enough data to characterize them. We live in a data poor environment. They are called weak signals. So what we need to do in order to identify and characterize emerging risks is two things. The first one, data collection, and the second one is to bring people and experts together in order to extract knowledge, to make sense, to connect the dots. So that's the process we have in place, and we heavily rely on experts networks. Climate change is one of these drivers, and what we have done under a methodological perspective at EFSA is really a kind of experimental laboratory. We have tried different things. The first one is to try and use climate change as a driver for long-term anticipation of emerging risks, not of a single emerging issue or emerging risk, but of a variety of issues or risks. And we have tried to characterize this driver, in this case climate change, by using scenarios, as you will see. Then what we have tried to do is new features, new methodologies for identification of emerging risks, in particular crowdsourcing, so citizen science. Of course, with crowdsourcing and citizen science, we were able of identifying a broad range of signals from a variety of information sources. And after that, it was, of course, necessary to make sense of this information, and we have used a multi-criteria approach in a participatory way, and we'll see together what I mean. And then we have tried to analyze the results of this characterization by putting all the emerging risks in a diagram of impact likelihood. And also we have tried to elaborate some tools that facilitate the communication of these emerging risks in terms of indicators of the effects of climate change and indicators for uncertainty, which is a very relevant problem. So we have been supported by CLEFSA network, and I'm very pleased to have enjoyed the collaboration also of Vittorio and Paola for this. All the major international institutions involved with climate change have been there, and they have supported us in the steering of the project and also in the elaboration of the criteria and also in the identification of relevant experts. So first of all, identification of emerging risks driven by climate change. As I said, we have used a variety of methodologies for this, but most of the issues we have identified were coming from a crowdsourcing survey. And as you can see, that means that not only scientific publications or reports or papers were taken on board, but also newspapers, social media, and magazines. And that's why I talk about weak signals. All of these signals are not underpinned by a robust evidence. And that's why we needed then the characterization process in order to extract knowledge and make sense of this data. We have identified more than 200 issues, but then filtering them out, we obtained 129 issues subdivided in these areas of relevance in the EFSA's remit: animal health, biological hazards for human health, plant health, contaminants, and nutritional aspects. And specific issues but also, of course, some of them are not clearly defined into a specific area, in the sense that they are applicable to different areas, like, for example, for animal health and human health. So here, as Vittorio said, we have multidisciplinary issues to be considered, but also generic issues like the spread of antibiotic-resistant bacteria, the integrity of refrigeration chain, zombie pathogens already mentioned by Vittorio, ocean acidifications, and so on. Of course, climate change is not acting in isolation. Climate change is interacting with other drivers, like, for example, climate change can have an impact on the type and amount of pesticides or veterinary drugs used, and so on. Once all these issues have been identified, they needed to be characterized in terms of a set of criteria for impact and for likelihood, plus other qualifying criteria, including risk management, the availability of risk management measures. And they have been assessed in a reference period and in a near future condition, as I will show you later. Some of these criteria have been used for a scoring system, have been attributed to a score. And we have used a network of around 60 experts to do so, to assess each issue against this set of criteria and to attribute a score to each of them. These are the climate change scenarios we have used in our analysis. We have used the ECMWF data stored in the Copernicus platform, data for temperature, precipitation, and extreme weather events related to a reference period, 1981 and 2010, and the near future condition, which is 2021, an average between 2021 and 2050. We have developed a CLEFSA app where the experts were supposed to attribute the most probable value for each of these criteria and for each issue, plus a range, which is already approaching what we have in mind for the uncertainty. And then we have built a probability distribution for each of the scoring experts, brought these scoring experts together, come out with an average, and we have tried to characterize the resulting cumulative curve in terms of probability weighted average, which is the central tendency, and a dispersion, which is an indication again of the uncertainty, a cumulative uncertainty, not only the uncertainty each assessor has in the assessment of that specific issue, but also the divergency across the different experts. We've tried to do that in different climate scenarios, the reference condition, so the present condition, and the future condition, and tried to characterize the delta. So what's the difference between the future condition and the present condition? And that's what we call delta, and we have attributed a numerical value to this. And these are all the issues we have identified in all the areas, spread across as a kind of scatter plot, where in the x-axis you can see the impact, and in the y-axis you can see the likelihood of emergence. You can see in this picture different colors, which are the different areas. Green colors are the top right, which are the plant health issues, and then in gray colors are the contaminants issues. They are, according to the experts we have used, they are those showing the highest likelihood of emergence and also the highest impact. Okay, we can go forward. If we think of the overall effect of climate change on food safety, this is a possible way to characterize it. You can see a histogram showing the distribution of scores, and you can see how, according to the experts, climate change, which is the right column, the future, the right columns for impact at the top and for likelihood at the bottom, you can see that, according to the expert, climate change is going to determine a higher impact and a higher likelihood of emergence of these issues. We have produced a set of score sheets. So basically here we are going into the topic of communication, which is a very tricky topic when we talk about something where we don't know much. We'll try to do it in an easily communicable way. And we have produced 27 score sheets for 27 emerging issues, where we have tried to summarize all the information we have identified, characterized, and analyzed in our study, also with the use of smileys to characterize whether the impact of climate change and the uncertainty associated with it is relevant or not for that specific issue. I go to the conclusions. So we have seen that in order to navigate an uncertain and complex world, drivers of change, the analysis of drivers of change is a possibility, but that implies the need to include in the analysis also the public. And we have tried to do that by using citizen science, crowdsourcing. But when we use crowdsourcing, then the problem we have is that we identify a huge variety of issues, but the information base around them is very, very limited. So we need to build an expert knowledge and networks in order to characterize and make sense and to connect the dots. By doing that, we have found out that climate change, the overall effect of climate change on food safety is an increase in the severity, duration, and frequency of the potential effects, but mainly an increase in the likelihood of emergence, which is characterized also by a lower uncertainty. So the experts we have brought together feel more confident about this conclusion. And plant health and marine biotoxins, but I would say biotoxins in general, are those showing the highest impact and the highest likelihood of emergence in a future climate change scenario. Recommendations for the future, I think Victoria has already highlighted some of them. Methodological developments for preparedness, that's very much needed. Also maybe revisiting surveillance and monitoring, including also the legislation in order to be prepared for emerging risks. Integrated policy, Victoria was mentioning One Health approaches, very much needed, bringing together environment, food, human health, animal health, plant health even together. The need to revisit risk assessment approaches, because we need to consider scenarios of climate change. This is not done so much so far. We need to consider scenarios of climate change in the risk assessment, in the problem formulation phase, but also in the hazard characterization, and also in the exposure. And cooperation is very much needed. So I'm sorry for the technical problem before. I'm a bit out of time. Thank you very much for your interest. Thank you.
Çok teşekkürler Sayın Doktor Maggiore bu değerli bilgiler için. Aslına bakarsanız yeni senaryoların oluşturulması, yeni risklerin identifiye edilmesinin ne kadar zorlu ve kompleks bir süreç içerdiğini bize çok sade bir şekilde aktardınız. Çok teşekkürler. Ben şimdi üçüncü konuşmacımızı davet etmek istiyorum. Profesör Doktor Paolo Battilani, Katolik Üniversitesi'nden kendileri. Bizlere iklim değişikliğinin mikotoksinler üzerine olan etkileri hakkında değerli görüşlerini paylaşacaklar. Buyurunuz Sayın Battilani.
Can you see my screen?
Yes. That's
Good.
perfect.
First of all, thanks a lot to the organizer to inviting me. And my presentation is more specific compared to the previous one. And I will talk about impact of climate change on mycotoxins. I am a professor in plant pathology, and mycotoxin is the focus of my research. And during the last 20 years, I really focused on different related topics. And so I'm very happy to talk about this problem to the audience. Apparent, okay. When we talk about climate change, health risk comes immediately as at the top of the topics we mentioned. And among health risk, mycotoxins are confirmed to play a crucial role. Why mycotoxins are so important in health risk? First of all, we have a very high position for mycotoxin in causing health risk, especially chronic health risk. And then it is confirmed that at least 25% of products are contaminated with at least one mycotoxin. And it was recently published a paper that confirmed that for some mycotoxins, especially in cereals, we have surely a higher percentage of contaminated products. Therefore, mycotoxins are really, really relevant for health risk. I would like to add that mycotoxins are naturally occurring compounds produced by fungi, so we always can find both the fungi and the mycotoxins. Surely we have a difference related to the growing area of the crops where we are working. But anyway, this is just an example. We have maize. Maize is one of the crops where mycotoxins are of great concern. And we have different fungi that are listed in this table. Each fungus produces one or more mycotoxins, and each fungus has a different optimal condition, which is orange in this table, and a suitable condition where the mycotoxin can be produced, which is the yellow one, and conditions that are not suitable. So we can see that on maize, we can surely have at least one fungus able to produce mycotoxins, because different fungi can grow on the crop, but they have different ecological needs. Why I am stressing this aspect? Because due to the diversity of ecological conditions that mycotoxin producing fungi have, we have a different geographic distribution of different fungi. In Southern Europe, we can have more frequently some fungi, while in the northern part of Europe, and the same obviously happens everywhere in the world, we have different fungi. But the meaning of this triangle that you can see on the map means that we have an overlapping of different fungi and consequently of different mycotoxins in the same crop, depending on the ongoing condition of the year. So coming back to climate change, we have certainties, and I don't want to spend a lot of time, but anyway, we know that with the climate change, the temperature increase is absolutely confirmed, so as the increase in carbon dioxide concentration in the air. But we also know that we have a different distribution of rainfall. But those variables that increase or change in the distribution impact a lot on fungi and mycotoxins. And what happens is that the behavior or the average condition we used to have in a certain area is surely changed, and we have a reduced level of certainties and an increased level of uncertainties. And to summarize, the extreme events that we are facing, we now know that it is not an idea of scientists, but it is a reality. The extreme events become more frequent, and so we have a quite high variability in climate conditions. And this is the reason, because we have a strong impact of climate change on mycotoxin producing fungi and consequently on the mycotoxin contamination. I think one of the best example regards aflatoxin outbreak in 2003 in Europe. It was the first event of aflatoxin outbreak in Europe. And it was in a year that, based on the historical meteorological data, it was a quite unusual year, because as you can see in the first part of the graph, it was completely out of the mean average temperature we commonly have during the summertime. But based on the on the climate change conditions, we can clearly see that 2003 is a year that will be quite common in the future. So 2003 was the first confirmation that we have a climate change with a strong impact on mycotoxins. But I would like also to highlight that a second event of very high contamination was highlighted in 2012, but exactly 2 years later, we had another alert in Europe that regarded different mycotoxins, zearalenone and deoxynivalenol, that on the contrary are not produced by fungi adapted to high temperature, but to low temperature and abundant rainfall. And this is exactly what happens in climate change. We have extreme events, and so also the variability between years is quite high. And so we have a year with a stronger concern regarding one mycotoxin, and another year with a stronger concern regarding a completely different mycotoxin and due to a completely different fungus. I also would like to stress another quite important effect of climate change. You can see in this graph, just have a look to the color, because that's more than enough. The color represents 3 different mycotoxins that we can find in maize. And as you can see, depending on the number you have below, you can have I bars for the blue color, or for the gray, or for the green one, which means that we can have a different level of contamination based on the number you have below. But what are those numbers? Those numbers represent 9 different locations, very close to each other. The maximum distance is 130 kilometers. And even if the distance is so short, we can have a quite variable level of contamination of completely different compounds produced by different fungi. How can we explain this wide variability in so close places in a geographic area? The explanation is done by the graph you have representing the aridity index. The aridity index is a way to summarize meteorological conditions. And you can see that for the growing season of maize, the aridity index was completely different in the 9 growing area of maize. It could be surprising, but it is true, because this is based on data collected in the field. What is the result of this quite variable meteorological condition? The result is that we can have a different fungi on the same crop, and they become prevalent in a certain period of the growing season, but in other periods, another fungus become the dominant one. The result of this co-occurrence of different fungi with different ecological condition request is that depending on the year, we can have very different mycotoxin contamination. And this is a kind of demonstration. We did some artificial inoculation of maize. And in 2016, we had a production of fumonisin lower compared to the following year. But the impact of the co-occurrence of other fungi allowed a decrease in fumonisin contamination, while in the following year, it was the opposite. So with the co-occurrence of fungi, the contamination was higher. And something similar happened also for another mycotoxin, aflatoxin. It was the opposite compared to fumonisin. So in the second year, the contamination was lower. The 2 years, just to give one value to summarize the whole season, the first year was a mild year with a mean temperature of 23 degrees centigrade. The following year was a warm year with a 28 degrees centigrade. So why I stress not only, I stress what happens in the farms, because climate change is not only a matter of concern for policymakers, for countries, it is also a matter of concern for farmers, because they face every day the changes caused by climate change. Maize and cereals in general were the most studied crop for mycotoxin contamination and climate change. And the conclusion will be shown in a very short time, but also in other crops, some studies were managed. For example, in tomato fruits for Alternaria Alternaria infection and Alternaria toxin contamination. And the 2 countries were considered, Poland and Spain. In Spain, apparently, future scenario doesn't show any significant change, while for Poland, it is expected to have a strong increase in Alternaria toxin contamination, because the fungus is advantaged by high temperature. The conclusion is that Poland is going to become a country similar to Spain, because, as also mentioned by Vittorio, we have a geographic shift of fungi and consequently a geographic shift of mycotoxin contamination problems. There are other examples, but I don't have so much time. And the comments we can do is that in some crops with climate change, we will have an extremely negative effect, while in other crops, we will not face a significant change, and especially in certain geographic area, we will not face strong changes in mycotoxin contamination. Because of this very wide variability between years and between crops, it is crucial to work with predictive modeling. Predictive modeling allows to do a prediction related to the meteorological data we can collect daily, and so they can help a lot the farmers to understand which kind of problem they can face in a certain area. But predictive models are also very useful to generate a climate change scenario And this is, I think, a nice example we managed in an EFSA project that confirmed aflatoxin as increasing a lot in Europe due to climate change, especially in the +2 degrees centigrade scenario, which is now considered the best, the most probable evolution of climate change. So I go very quickly because several ideas I reported in this slide were also reported by Vittorio. We have a cascade impact of climate change, and especially talking about mycotoxins, we talk about food safety, but for some geographic areas, mycotoxins are also a matter of food security, because the production must be thrown away because of high mycotoxin contamination. Therefore, to do step forward and to see the perspective of mycotoxin management, surely I can repeat concept just reported by the speaker that talked before me. We must have a chain and multi-actor approach, intersectoral and multidisciplinary. We must build a resilience to climate change and have in mind the One Health concept and a global vision. And the key approaches is surely to see the food system as a whole and to learn from each other. I mean, different pathosystems in case of fungi, different step in the chain or different geographic area must work together and learn from each other to find a solution, and those based on scenario analysis. Thanks for listening, and hope to have clarified some concept.
Çok teşekkürler Profesör Battilardi. Çok sade bir şekilde bizlere sıcaklık, iklim değişikliği, coğrafya ve küf gelişimi ilişkisini özetlediniz. Yaklaşık 10-12 dakikalık bir süremiz var. Birkaç sorumuz var. Bu soruları ben ilgili muhataplarına yöneltmek istiyorum ama her şeyden önce Türkiye'de birkaç soru aynı noktayı işaret ediyor. Türkiye şu anda özellikle Marmara Denizi'nde bir müsilaj sorunu yaşıyor. Bunun su ürünleri üzerinden gıda güvenliğine olan yansımaları ne olabilir? Bunlarla ilgili bir değerlendirme yapabilir misiniz? Her üç konuşmacımıza da yöneltiyorum. Hangisi ya da hangileri uygun bulurlarsa. Bir de benzer bir deneyimi daha önce bir yerde gördüler mi? Yani Marmara Denizi'nde şu an yaşadığımız sorun ne kadar bilginiz var bilemiyorum ama ciddi bir müsilaj sorunu yaşanıyor. Bu konuyla ilgili su ürünleri üzerinden gıda güvenliğiyle ilişkilendirerek yorum yapmak isteyen bir konuşmacımız varsa. Yanıtlarını rica edeyim.
Maybe I can start, but I'm sure also, Angelo, this is a topic that he knows very well about the algae, the bloom of algae that we are seeing in different places, as we mentioned in the world. This is it's concerning. There are, and depending on the type of algae, there may be different food safety issues that we are concerned with. Some may have some toxins. Others, for example, may accumulate metals, like, for example, arsenic. And particularly what is interesting is that in some of these algae, like, for example, seaweed, one of the issue is not so much the organic arsenic, which is less toxic, but it's the inorganic form, which is the most toxic one. So there are issues that needs to be considered from a toxin point of view, but also from heavy metals point of view. So it is indeed something to be considered. And it becomes an issue when these algae are consumed. For example, seaweed is consumed and has different application in the food sector, but it also can be an issue when the algae are consumed by fish. So if there is a food safety hazard within the algae, and then the algae is consumed by fish, and the fish is consumed by humans, then there may be a cascade effect at the end, and we have some exposure to the hazard. So I don't know if that sort of respond to the question, but it's a complex topic that will depend a lot on sort of the type of algae that we are considering. Thanks.
Çok teşekkürler yanıtınız için. Başka bir yanıt. Dr. Maggiore. Buyurun lütfen.
Yes, no, maybe I agree with what Vittorio said. Maybe I can add on top of that when we put the food safety, the assessment of food safety and the food chain in a system approach, then we start to consider drivers and indicators and trends and so on. And one of these trends is, for example, also in terms of policy trends, what we are observing in policies and strategies. And for example, blue economy. So we are going to use more and more resources from the sea, from the oceans as food and feed material. And one of these is seaweed, with all the risks that may emerge out of this. So yes, that's an important aspect to consider for preparedness to future challenges and future changes.
Çok teşekkürler Dr. Maggiore. Bir diğer sorumuz Sayın Profesör Battilani'ye. Buna ben minik bir ekleme yaparak soruyu biraz genişletmek istiyorum. Bitkisel ham maddelerde bitkisel ham maddelerde mikotoksin bulunabilirliğini hasat öncesi öngörmek mümkün mü? Buna ek olarak bir soruda bu kantitatif değerlendirmeler, modellemeler hasat öncesi mikotoksin varlığına yönelik mevcut. Peki bunları yüksek mikotoksin varlığı koşulunda yeni koşula adapte edebilecek senaryoları ne kadar uygulayabiliriz? Adaptasyon senaryoları.
So I didn't show quantitative data because we have different values depending on the crop, depending on the year. But anyway, there is a legislation that fixes a maximum amount allowed depending on the mycotoxin and the crop or the product, processed product. What happens with the climate change is that we can have an increase in certain mycotoxins and a decrease in other mycotoxins. And unfortunately, sometimes we have the same, more than one mycotoxin on the same crop. And therefore, even if one decreases, the other one increases. And so in practice, we frequently face a problem, anyway, a problem of mycotoxin, especially in those climate change scenarios. Probably I didn't answer the whole question because I lost part of the question.
Soruya büyük ölçüde yanıt verdiniz. Yani adaptasyon senaryoları için elimizdeki kantitatif modeller yeterli mi? Yoksa bu modellerin geliştirilmesine ihtiyaç var mı?
So for the future, we should first of all try to apply predictive models because depending on the fungus, which is the dominant one, we can use different, techniques during the growing season of the crop or at harvest or eventually post-harvest to reduce mycotoxin contamination. And so it is quite important to have a prediction regarding what is the crucial problem in the crop in that specific year. And we have some tools available for prevention, because when we talk about a mycotoxin, we must think about especially on prevention, because till now, all the action that aim to reduce the contamination post-harvest are not so effective, cause a wide amount of production. I mean, we can select the product, but we discharge a lot of product, and it is not strictly related to the level of contamination, for example. Or we can use some compounds, but most of them has an effect on the flavor or on the characteristics of the product, and so they are not very welcome from the consumer point of view. And so we must think about prevention, and we can do our best with the cropping system and also with the prediction, because we can manage the product at harvest. If we know that there is a certain level of risk, we can do more to select the product or to harvest the product in advance, because I didn't mention that mycotoxins are very stable, and so when they are produced, they stay in the product and in the chain, because they survive high temperature treatments. The common treatment we do for food processing do not reduce mycotoxin contamination. And so it is quite important to prevent instead of thinking about a solution later.
Çok teşekkürler Profesör Battilani. Zannediyorum Doktor Fatih Öre kısa süre içerisinde ayrılmak zorunda aramızdan, ama ona birkaç soru geldi. Derleyip toplayıp tek bir soru halinde soracağım. Sunumunuzda yenilebilir böceklerin gıdalarda kullanımına izin verildiğine dair bir görsel paylaştınız. Gıda güvenliği ile ilişkilendirerek kısa bir yorum rica ediyoruz sizden. Avrupa Birliği'nin bakışı nasıl, ya da Avrupa'nın bakışı nasıl, gıda güvenliği perspektifinden ne gibi riskler söz konusu, ne gibi prosedürler izlenmeli böceklerin bir kaynak olarak kullanılması açısından?
Thank you for the questions. And I think edible insects is one of these emerging topics that it's important to be looked at, balancing what are the benefits, the opportunities that they may bring, as opposed to any potential risk that may arise. So we need to recognize, and this is what we have tried at least to do in our recent publication, we have acknowledged that insects provides and may provide a lot of opportunities and benefits in terms of sustainability, as I mentioned, because they consume are so much less impacting on the environment compared to other protein sources like livestock, poultry, or even aquaculture. But there are some question marks from a food safety point of view. And like most or any other type of food, the issues are not different. So, for example, the biological type of hazards, we don't know yet very well the microbiota of the insects. So how, for example, these may be impacting on food safety from a human perspective, it's not very clear. The chemical hazards, for example, the mycotoxin, also may be something to look at. The residues that they may bring, for example, when they may bring pesticides or even bedrock residues, and also linking to the antimicrobial resistance, because again, they can transfer some genes as well as some residues of antimicrobials. But one of the key critical points from a food safety point of view that needs to be looked at from with the insects is the issue of allergens, allergenicity, because there may be some cross reaction, for example, for individuals that are even sensitive to crustacean, for example, and this is an area where further research is needed. So we have tried to explain those type of issues in the report. It was also a great collaboration also with other experts, including EFSA. We also have consulted with FDA and in the US to try to crystallize what are the current state of knowledge, and also from a regulatory perspective, what are the different approaches and frameworks that I would apply in different regions. So I would encourage the participants, if they have a chance, to look at the publication, and hopefully they will be shedding some light on this important topic. Thank you.
Çok teşekkürler yanıtınız için. Bir kısa soru, muhtemelen de kısa bir yanıt bekleyeceğim. Doktor Maggiori'ye yeni gıda güvenliği riskleri konusunda tüketici algısını ve hassasiyetini risk değerlendirme sürecinde nasıl yönetiyorsunuz? Nasıl bir model, nasıl bir yol izliyorsunuz? Teşekkürler.
As I said, what we are trying to do at EFSA is to really monitor the system which is around the food safety and the food chain, and all the changes that are occurring there. And we are indeed observing also some changes in consumers' perception that may lead to changes in consumers' habits, like, for example, a changing perception in terms of what is healthy and what is nutritious and what is sustainable. So we see this trend and we are trying to monitor it, because it could indeed drive the emergence of risks for food safety. So it's something that we try to consider. Absolutely.
Çok teşekkürler. Çok teşekkürler. Son soruyu da bütün konuşmacılarımıza yöneltip çok kısa yanıt alarak kapatmak istiyorum. 100 yılın sonuna kadar 2 derecelik ortalama bir artış, durum tespiti yapıyoruz, öngörülerde bulunuyoruz, ancak radikal olarak neler yapmalıyız bu 2 derecelik sıcaklık artışının getirebileceği olumsuzlukları minimize edebilmek için? Radikal önlemler neler olması gerekir sizin perspektifinizden? Teşekkürler.
Sorry, to whom is the question?
Anybody. You can start if you wish.
So is the question, how can we handle the variation of parameters associated with climate change? Is that, did I understand correctly?
Well, at the end of this century, the temperature will rise 2 centigrade degree. Okay. And what kind of radical precautions we should take to minimize the negative effects of this increase?
Okay, what we can do, I speak from, let's say, from the perspective of,
we can hear.
I speak from our perspective, the perspective of EFSA. What we can do is to get ready for these changes. So get ready, preparedness. Preparedness means to set up tools that can allow us to anticipate, so to know them in advance, to minimize surprises, but also sometimes also to prevent problems from occurring. This is what we can do. So development of methodologies, and including foresight methodologies, we are moving that direction as well, and which is not really defining how the future will look like. It's really trying to get as prepared, to minimize the surprises, I would say, and then engage in discussion with policymakers and risk managers in general, in order to strengthen surveillance and monitoring of possible risks that may emerge in the future. And also, as I said in my presentation, also maybe stimulate changing in the legislation in order to account for this. And cooperation. Cooperation is the other big issue. It's something that is easy to say, but it's always difficult to implement. But the only way to get prepared for these changes is by working together, because as we have seen, the multidisciplinarity is really a main feature of the impact of climate change on the food system. So we need to bring experts together in order to characterize this problem.
Thank you very much. Is there anybody who may want to add up?
I think Angelo has covered it very, very, very well. Maybe just one additional point that, at least from our perspective, from FAO perspective, it's important, and we are looking and we're working on that into making our agri-food systems more sustainable. So we are all aware that we need to produce more food because the global population is growing. There is an increasing demand for example, we mentioned proteins, but other type of nutrients as well. So we need to produce and produce better, but we also need to produce in a more sustainable way. So this is also something that is it's important to stress. And in that aspect, it's also important that we look at some of these emerging topics as we discuss, edible insects being one, the new way of production and the new ways of looking at that, looking again at what are the opportunities and benefits that they may bring, but also be careful and with an optic of what are the potential food safety issues that they may pose. Thanks.
Çok teşekkür ederim. Profesör Battilani, ekleyecek bir şeyiniz var mı?
No, just a very minor comment. I think Vittorio and Angelo covered the topic. I think it is quite difficult to counteract the increase in temperature or in the global climate change. Any action to try to counteract the trend is based on a global approach, and so a single country cannot do something which is really significant. But again, as a scientist, I think we are doing a big effort to understand the impact of climate change and to try to predict, and it is connected with the other comments, because if we can predict and we understand the impact, we can surely face better the problem.
Çok teşekkür ediyorum. Ben her üç konuşmacımıza da değerli katkılarından dolayı ve katılımcılarımıza sorularıyla vermiş oldukları katkılardan dolayı. Değerli katılımcılar, Gıda Güvenliği Sohbetlerinin 4. gün oturumunu da sonlandırmış bulunuyoruz. Yarın saat 2'de son oturumumuzda tekrar görüşmek üzere. Hepinize saygılar sunuyorum. Hoşçakalın.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you. Bye bye. Thank you.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye bye.
Goodbye. Thank you very much. Thank you. Goodbye.